Hello and welcome to episode number 13 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, August 31st, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hey Ginny, great to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
I am Gini Dietrich. I own an integrated marketing communications firm based in Chicago called Arment Dietrich. I've written a couple of books. I have a podcast, blah, blah, blah.
You have an awesome blog, a good following.
Yes, I have a blog, Spin Sucks. Yep.
And Spin Sucks. So I just read your book, and I thought it was a great guide for... It hit so many topics that often we don't read about or people don't share when it comes to, building your online reputation, managing your online reputation. I mean, you got down and dirty with Google and, letting people understand the technical side of things as well as how to work those technical side of things to your advantage.
I think one of the big misconceptions we have, and part of this is because, as a communicator, we're trained in specific things: media relations, crisis communications, reputation management, events, whatever it happens to be. And until 5 or 6 years ago, it pretty much all remained the same. And now, everything's been turned on its head. So we have this big misconception that only the really geeky guys who work in their mom's basement with their headphones on and it's dark and they don't talk to people, they're the only ones who can do SEO. And really, with all the algorithm changes that Google has done, it's up to us now. It's communicators that have to create the content and have it valuable and engaging and interesting, and how to get the social shares on that content, and how to get backlinks from high authority sites where it used to be the techie guys would go and buy those links. So it's come full circle from the perspective that we are the ones now that are in charge of that versus the geeky programmers and developers.
And there's two things to that. There's one that it's come full circle, and it's everybody always said back in the day when people were focusing on those crappy links or how to put in as much keywords as you could and sometimes hide them so you can't see them, only the crawlers can see them. And everybody would always say focus on your readers. When you focus on your readers, you're going to get the optimization.
Right.
It's going to bring you there. And that's the truth today. That's what Google has reinforced or changed their algorithm so that we do. That's what we have to do. And as communicators, in the book, I loved how you gave so many examples of, the PR professional or the communications professional who doesn't understand these technical but not so technical things. I mean, we're talking about writing the right headline. We're talking about writing the right kind of content and optimizing the content so it's not spammy, it's still good for the reader, but you're still getting the maximum value that you can for the search engines. And you're so right on when there's so many out there who just don't get that yet.
Well, one of the things I think it's the big difference is you almost have to do it for yourself before you really understand it. I think it's different when you're doing it for an organization or for clients because you're doing it under their mission and goals and vision and all those kinds of things. And it may not be something that you're passionate about. So one of the things that really, really bothers me about communicators is if they're doing media relations, they're using email to spam. And so they'll send this pitch out to 400 bloggers and journalists that doesn't make sense to anybody. And I think until you blog or you write for a paper or a magazine as a freelancer and you get pitches from PR professionals, you really don't understand how bad it is.
No, it's true. And one of the big messages that you said early on in the book and kept consistent throughout was to continue to build and keep trust. If you want to sell over the long term, if you want to succeed over the long term, it's all about that trust with your audiences. And I love that you approach it from a marketing and a communication strategy side of it. And I'm on my side as crisis communications, and that's the same thing that I'm always saying as well, is that you need to build the trust. You need to build the trust before you get into a crisis so that you could fall on that trust and leverage it to sustain your own reputation and not, fall victim to the crisis over the long term with that trust. And so if you look at marketing and communications, and you have to build trust so that you can sell and succeed over the long term. And if there's a crisis, that's what's going to help you come out of the crisis.
Right.
It just goes together.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, is when there is a crisis, and unfortunately today, every organization is going to go through a crisis. It used to be in the old days, you and I aren't that old, but in the old days of crisis communication, we would write plans, and they would get put in a drawer, and we would just review them again the next year and see if there was anything that needed to change.
If it was a smart company.
Right. That's because there was never, unless you have a manufacturing plant where, something could blow up, or a chemical plant, or, food, those kinds of organizations typically have a crisis plan. But, the small businesses, medium-sized businesses, they didn't, because nothing ever happened. Today, somebody doesn't like you online, and all of a sudden you have a crisis. And that's where the trust comes in, because when you've built that level of trust and brand ambassadors and influencers and your community and all those kinds of things, loyal customers, when there is a crisis, and there will be a crisis, you are able to come out of it because people know that this was a mistake, and people make mistakes, and it's in how you handle it that really allows you to continue building that trust.
It's exactly in how you handle it. You have to be prepared to handle it, because you can't wing it. If you wing it, you're going to do something wrong. So you do have to be prepared. It's so true that people, when you humanize a brand, which is a big topic within your book in building trust, when you humanize the brand, people understand that you take a lot of pressure off of yourself. You're not just a logo. You're not just a corporation. You're humans behind the brand. Humans make mistakes. When you humanize and you connect and you build that trust, when you make a mistake and you say, we made a mistake, we're sorry, here's what we're doing to fix it, here's what we're doing to make sure that it never happens again, and all of the other things that you have to do, people are going to forgive you.
People are going to forgive you. And there's two little words I think people forget to say. I'm sorry.
Too often.
Or they'll follow it up with, I'm sorry, but. Or my favorite one, and I use this example in the book, is the Kenneth Cole thing. When he came out and said he was sorry for using the Cairo hashtag to promote his new fall line or spring line, I can't remember which. And he came out and said, I'm sorry that I offended some of you.
Oh, that's the worst. Yeah, I'm sorry if you.
Apology.
That's not an apology. I'm sorry that you took it the wrong way.
Right. That's not an apology.
Yeah, it's not an apology. And part of being a leader is owning a mistake and taking responsibility. And when you look at, I love to talk about the KitchenAid, the rogue tweet. So, the Cynthia Soledad, when the KitchenAid tweet went out, first of all, that was more than an issue. It was a potential crisis because it was defaming. It was defamatory. Right. So there could have been legal pursuit against KitchenAid, against the rogue tweeter, and there's precedent set in the UK to go after every substantial person on Twitter who has a substantial following who retweeted it. So there's, things are happening in the world to make it even more risky to make these types of mistakes that, lead into defaming somebody, especially the President of the United States. But when she came out and said, I'm not the one who tweeted it, but I'm the one in charge of this account. I take full responsibility. I'm deeply, sorry to the presidential family and everybody who had to see this tweet. I'm available on the record. She did amazing things to take that. Normally it's an issue that you could turn into a positive opportunity. Right. Crises are harder. This was a real potential crisis. And she actually turned it into a brilliant case study where all of the blogs and news articles that were written about it, they didn't say KitchenAid defames the President of the United States. They said KitchenAid knows how to manage a crisis. This is an example for every organization to learn from. And that's the power of owning, of humanizing and owning, being accountable and then doing the right thing.
And taking responsibility for it. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a powerful thing when you're not scared to do it.
And I think that's part of what is going on here. So many leaders are so scared to participate online because of something like that. Well, what happens if? Well, you know what? It is going to happen. The problem is it could very well happen without you even knowing about it if you're not participating online. So get smart about it. Understand how to participate online. Understand what the differences between your offline and your online reputation and the similarities. And monitor and listen and pay really close attention, because it becomes less scary when you do those things. But when you look at it from this big, oh, holy crap, what if I have somebody that I've hired, down the food chain that sends this rogue tweet, has an F-bomb in their tweet, or tweets drunk or whatever. I mean, you're working with human beings. That stuff's going to happen. So you just have to be able to understand it, learn it, and manage it.
Yep, and plan for it. If you plan for it, you know that, okay, we have a plan. If this happens, we hope it doesn't happen, but if it happens, at least we have a guide to help us.
I think, too, the plan takes away the emotional aspect of it, because when you're in the middle of something like this, it's very hard not to be emotional and defensive. When you have a plan and you've prepared for it, you're able to look at it more logically and rationally.
Which is, it's a big part of the training, too. And it's funny that you say that like that, because I recently did a training for a global nonprofit, and they have a bunch of different franchises. So I did it for the head office. The head office is responsible for guiding each franchise, because if something were to break out, so the training was on issues management, and they wanted to target Facebook, because that's the majority of their interaction engagement with their followers and their communities. So, we had to say things like, so I put up a whole bunch of different Facebook scenarios. Well, it started with a day of training, and then the next day was a soft simulation where they're looking at their computer screen, they're looking at the big screen where it's also projected to, and they're seeing Facebook and comments. So comments that they have to now resolve. And some were as mundane, I should say, but very realistic as, I'm really pissed off that you guys took free towels away from the gym, which is a very frequent issue that they have to deal with, and they have to guide the local. You can't just come back and say, well, sorry, too bad. You do have to respond in a certain way that it has to go with the brand, and you have to guide the franchise that's responsible for it the right way. But then you also get the harder one. So it escalated. And one of the things that, talking about emotion in testing, is that I had to create scenarios that were very profane and very offensive, and I had to not blur out the words. So so one of them, for example, was attacking homosexuals. And so instead of, using vulgarity and putting stars, I actually had to, and the person that I worked with the representative of the company, of the organization, agreed with me that we had to give them that emotion. Right. I prepared them for it. I said, this is not, I don't even feel comfortable reading this to you, but you're going to get these sorts of things, and they're going to drive an emotion in you, and you have to be able to move that emotion and continue to think logically on behalf of the brand. So, the emotional part is extreme, or it can be extreme. It's also what drives a crisis. It's what drives a marketing campaign to go viral, and it's what drives a crisis to go viral, because it's that point of commonality that you connect with others, and it's the emotion that goes viral, or that spreads it virally. And at the same time, the emotion can lead you down the wrong path if you get
absolutely
too emotional.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to look at, the similarities between how, you talk about all the different forms of media in the book. So you have the earned media and it's the right word, right? Media. There's earned, and you have like 4 or 5. Maybe it's not media. Maybe media is not the right word. I'm drawing a blank.
Are you talking paid, earned, owned?
Yes. So, and it goes, everything that you said there goes hand in hand when you look at crisis. It's amazing how everything is so interconnected today.
It is.
And to do one right means that you're probably going to be able to do the other one right as well.
Probably,
yeah. Planning.
Hopefully.
One quote, actually, that you have in the book, I think it's early on, but I'm going to use it. I loved it. I just stared at it for a few seconds, is business is personal.
Well, it is, right?
It absolutely is.
Earlier, there are human beings behind all of this, that it's not we don't do business with organizations. We don't do business with logos. We don't do business with brands. We do business with people. And I think that's hard for many, not all, but many executives to understand, because for so long, everything that we've done has been, I mean, you would hire a communications firm because of their Rolodex and relationship with journalists, because they could help you with branding and messaging and positioning. They could do your media training and help you, help your executives learn how to say the same thing, the right thing all the time. And we had this perception of being in control of our brand. And today, it's been completely flipped on its head. We really never had control. We just didn't have anybody that had a vocal platform like they do on the social networks to expose their hatred and all that. So we had this way of doing things all the way up until 5 years ago, that it was very much, we are the organization, we are the brand, this is what we do, and there were no people behind it. And then Tony Hsieh from at Zappos comes along, and he goes, well, guess what? I'm going to open up all the doors and the windows, and I'm going to let you see inside. I'm going to let you talk to everybody who works inside this organization, from the intern all the way up to me. I'm going to give my customer service reps as much as they need and the resources that they need to be successful and to service you, the customer. I'm going to let you know what our culture is like. I'm going to let you right inside. And he's the one that changed this all for us, for everybody, because now everybody expects, as a consumer, it doesn't matter if you're B2B or B2C or a nonprofit or whatever, we expect to have relationships with the people who work inside the company, and not just our direct contact, but the janitor, the receptionist, the interns, the CEO, and everybody in between.
Absolutely. And for marketing, it does wonders. For crisis, it does wonders. What I love about Zappos is I actually recently watched their About Us video on their website, and it's, instead of being about us, it's about the employees. It's the employees that are on it, CEOs on it too, but it's really about the employees, and they talk about how Zappos changed their life, how it makes them a better person for, in things that they face, when they go to the bank and they look for opportunities to help people, because that's the corporate culture within the organization, and they feel like it's actually making them better human beings. It's so powerful.
Interesting. I'm going to have to watch it. I haven't seen it.
I'll send it to you. I read an article that talked about it, and I went and watched it, and I was really, really impressed with the way that business is personal.
It is. Absolutely is.
Yeah. And not just that, I mean, you talk about in the book the online reputation side of things, where you have to search. And I completely agree. You have to search for, you can't just listen, but you also have to proactively go out there and Google your company name, your products, your services, your executives' names. And one thing that you also have to search for, your company name sucks.
Yep. Or I hate company.
Yeah. Or, the negativity that just to see. And bringing in the whole business is personal. If you have, there's not a line anymore, in my opinion, that really, well, maybe for some, not for me anyway, that separates the business side of you, your personal brand in business, and your personal life. So if you represent an organization and you're predominant within that organization, and that organization goes into a crisis, somehow, probably, your name's going to be dragged through the mud with it.
Yep.
So business is personal on so many different levels.
Well, I'll give you a really good example of that. Almost 2 years ago, we published a blog post by one of our employees, and somebody came forward, in my opinion, did not handle it in the right way. Instead of, coming to us privately first, saying, I think that this blog post has been plagiarized and here's why, and presented his case, he went on the blog and he said, I think this blog post has been plagiarized. Here's the link to my blog post. We did our due diligence and we dug into it and to see if he was right, and we discovered that no, he was not correct. So publicly I said, I appreciate where this is coming from. I understand that you both wrote about the same topic. The blog post was not plagiarized. Here's what we did in our due diligence to figure it out, and we're sorry, but we're standing behind our employee. Well, he kept coming back at us and kept posting comments. And we have a very, very active and engaged community, and the community started to take him down and like started attacking him. And it was very uncomfortable for me because it's not the culture that I've built for the community. And so I was trying to balance, you know, not letting the community attack him, but also not letting him come in and continue to attack us. And I finally said to him, you've stated your case. We've looked into it. From our perspective, this is closed. Please, you know, stop commenting. Because what he was doing is he was copying and pasting and putting his comment up at the top. So it kept continuing up there. And, you know, from that perspective, to your point earlier, the trust thing and the community and all that kind of stuff. Well, fast forward about 8 months later, and that employee left, and we were going through some files and discovered that she had indeed plagiarized the blog post.
Oh, no.
And it was done in a way that through our own due diligence, we just couldn't tell. But we discovered that, you know, she had visited the site about 2 days before she wrote her blog post, and then she had copied and pasted that blog post into a Word document, and we found that one. So I wrote a blog post and I said, you know, we were wrong, and I feel really crappy about it. And then I sent him a personal note and said, you know, I'm really sorry about this. And he he came back and attacked again, and he got his sister to attack. And it was one of those things where I was like, we made a mistake, and we thought we had done all the right things. We did our due diligence. I've outlined everything. I was wrong. And the community was really supportive. And I think that's where this all comes down to, is business is personal. There are human beings behind it. I personally made a mistake. It looked to me absolutely 100% like she had not plagiarized the blog post. And it wasn't until she left the organization that we found all this documentation to prove the thing wrong. And from my perspective, I think I did the right thing. I did exactly what I would have recommended to clients. You know, I went and I apologized, and I did it publicly, and I did it privately to him as well.
And when he came back and attacked you, what was the attack for?
That, you know, I didn't mention his name or the blog post because I didn't want to create this extra fire. Mm-hmm. And he thought that I should have written a public letter specifically to him.
Ah.
Yeah, so.
Okay. And it's funny, it's interesting because 8 months later, I think a lot of people would have felt the same way that you did, with feeling badly because you want to do the right thing and you made a mistake and it wasn't your fault, but the mistake was made. And they probably wouldn't have gone back to post about it again because they didn't want to bring attention to it again.
You know, we went back and forth about it.
But in your, like, so there's the two sides of things. If it dies down and the guy moves on with his life and it never comes back up, okay, fine, maybe, you know, you wouldn't have to go back and say that you made a mistake, so willingly put that back out there. However, if behind the scenes for 8 months, he's talking with lawyers and he's figuring out a way to bring Spin Sucks down because he really feels wronged, and then it comes out that you knew that you had made a mistake. So there's like no win-win there, because today anything is possible.
Yes. And that was the other thing, you know, because of this, and for the exact reason you just pointed out, the lawsuit side of things, I had to consult our attorney on this. And our attorney was very specific about, okay, here's what you can say, and here's what you absolutely cannot say. And so in my private note to him, I said, look, I can't mention these 3 things, and here's why. You know, counsel has advised against it. So eventually, you know, he did write a blog post about it on his blog, and you know, I mean, it wasn't flattering by any stretch of the imagination. And I commented on that and apologized on his as well. But yeah, I think you're right. There isn't a win-win, and you have to, I think that's where an issue becomes a crisis. And when you know about something and you sweep it under the rug and pretend it isn't there, and then it eventually comes out, because it always comes out.
Absolutely.
That's when it becomes this huge thing that you could have managed years earlier.
Yeah, and also look at the outcome. Okay, the guy, you know, maybe Maybe he was extreme. Maybe he gets plagiarized all the time. We don't know what happens behind the scenes. So whatever fueled his really big fury to, your little mistake. The fact is that when you look at it, when I hear about it, all I'm going to take away from this is, wow, Ginny's a really good person.
Well, thank you.
You really care, and you did the right thing, and you followed your gut and to do the right thing. So, and I think that that's what the most people are going to take out of that situation. And that's part of that whole building the trust. And yeah, things can backfire, but when it comes down to it, what else are you going to take away from it? You made a mistake, and hey, you even put yourself back into the fire to right that wrong.
Right.
So that's a good story.
It was pretty painful.
Yeah, it's a sucky situation.
Yeah, it was pretty painful.
They usually are. And sometimes beyond our control, especially when you put, I always say that you have to educate and train your employees, and then you have to let go of the reins and trust them to be responsible adults. Right. And sometimes it backfires, but you can weed out those, over time.
And sometimes you discover, months or years later that it's backfired. I mean, there's, it's hard to, this is a completely different subject, but it's really hard to run a business and put yourself out there and say, this is the way we do things, and then have an employee do something completely different and opposite than what you even believe in. And
to be blindsided by it.
Yeah.
Where you didn't even see it coming.
Yeah.
It happens, though. Again, it's that humanizing.
Well, in talking about trust, I would have had much more respect for this employee if she had come to me and said, you know what, I did this, I made a mistake, I was under a lot of pressure to get it done by the deadline, and then I could have publicly said, yeah, this happened, and here's what we're going to do about it.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
To the day that I confronted her about it, when I found all some other information, she denied it. So
really?
That's the other thing about trust is, my mom always said to us when we were kids, if you get in trouble at school and I find out about it from the teacher before I've heard about it from you, you're going to be in much bigger trouble. And that's how I run the business. Like, I would much rather you come to me and say, I made a mistake, and here's what's going to happen because of it. But if I'm blindsided by it, I'm going to be ruthless.
Well, of course. And it's your reputation that you need to, sustain.
Right. And that's the kind of stuff that creates a crisis. That's the kind of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. You have some other good, great story. Well, you have a lot of great case studies in the book, but there were two that you had personal connection with that I thought were so interesting because they're realities. They're realities on both fronts, that from what people face internally and from what we see people face externally. The first one was your own experience with the internal bullying via email.
Oh, yes. I forgot I put that in the book. Oh, yes.
At first I'm like, maybe I shouldn't say, maybe this is private. I'm like, no, she wrote about this in the book. I can talk about this.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I thought that do you want to maybe share that story a little bit? Because I think it might, I was reading it and I was thinking, how many people probably face something similar to this internally and don't know what to do about it?
I get very, I'm very mother henish. I'm very, very protective of my team. But when you do something that hurts that trust or violates that, where I feel betrayed, I'm not so nice. So
yeah, no kidding.
We went virtual in 2011, and so today my team is scattered across North America. I have some in Canada and the rest in the U.S. But before, we were in an office in River North in Chicago, and really nice office space. The only problem with the office space that has nothing to do with the story, but it's kind of funny, is that it was in one of the historical buildings right by the river, and so they didn't have an elevator. We were on the 4th floor, and there were 66 stairs up. So people would call and be like, I'm at the bottom of the stairs. Can we meet somewhere else? And I always sold it to my team as the health benefit program because I had to climb the stairs every day, right?
It's good for the heart.
Yeah. So we had this really robust intern program, and what we would do is we every summer would hire 4 interns, paid them. They learned the job. They learned, they weren't like going and getting us coffee. They were learning how to do their jobs. They were in charge of things like client newsletters and media relations, clipbooks and things like that. So they all sat in one little area, and the idea was that they all competed for one full-time job. And it was really fun to watch over the years because, in the beginning they all competed against each other, and it was fun to watch because it was a friendly competition. They would always try to one-up one another. So we were getting really great work from these young professionals who hadn't graduated from college. Really great work. And then there was a group of kids that decided that they all wanted to work together and that they all wanted that one job. And so they worked together as a team and made it impossible for us to choose just one, which was fascinating.
Yeah, no kidding.
Fascinating. And then there was a group of kids that couldn't stand one another, and the competition was horrid. And they would, oh my gosh, they would send emails to one another and to their direct supervisors that were, I still to this day cringe when I think about the kinds of things that were said to other human beings in the written form.
Yeah.
So that you could see it, right?
Yeah.
How stupid can you be? And they wouldn't have conversations. So all of this angst and anger and this really stressful environment was created because they were saying horrible, horrible things to one another on email, and then just being all pleasant and perfect in person so that I couldn't tell. So I'd walk through, the office, and it looked like they were all getting along and everyone was happy, and they were actually just saying these horrible things to one another. And I couldn't figure out, morale was really low, and people were snapping at each other and they were complaining about stuff, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. And I finally happened upon one of these emails, and I was like, oh, interesting. So I banned internal email. I said, you cannot email one another. And my IT guy fixed it so that they could not email internally. They could not send an email to anybody inside the organization. They could only email externally, of course, to clients and things. And what that did is it forced them to have conversations with the person who was sitting next to them or across from them, right? And morale improved dramatically within the first 30 days. I mean, it was amazing to watch because they stopped saying these horrible things to one another, because they would never say these things that they were saying in email in person. So when they were forced to actually talk to one another, it became a much better environment to be in. But man, wow, some of those things, I was just like, what is wrong with you people?
It's amazing that, first of all, I don't know if, I think that it's a good strategy, especially the way it worked out, to ban internal email. I think that that's a kind of an out of the box. I think most people would have spoken with them, asked them to stop, kind of not made such a concrete decision, or I don't know if that's the right word to say it, but so I think that that's really interesting, as well as the outcome that it gave.
Yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen, but all I knew is that I was angry enough and they had betrayed my trust enough that I didn't care. They were not going to email one another. That was my only goal. I didn't even think further than that.
Which is so much mother hen.
Yeah, I'm a complete mother hen.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me still. I mean, I don't like cruelty, so I have a hard time I get so many emails and phone calls from people, all over the world saying this is what's happening, I'm being defamed or being attacked online. And to this day, I still, I work with organizations, but I'll get that odd phone call from the person, and on the other end of the line, they're crying because it's been 3 years. And I still can't wrap my mind around how cruel humans are to each other through the written word, which, first of all, like you said, how stupid can you be, because it's all documented. And secondly, it's amazing that it stopped when they actually, like, that they were bold enough to do that and then look at each other because they're sitting in the same office, and yet take away that written opportunity, and it completely changed. It's now we're getting into psychology, but it's very interesting, I think, to explore and to see, and very very heart-filled, and I don't know, my heart goes out to the people who face these types of things publicly. So this was internally, and that sucks, but publicly, when their reputation is just being dragged through the mud, and in oftentimes when it's an individual against an individual, it's just so petty.
Well, it's funny you say that because in the early days of the social networks, and I'm talking like 2008, 2009, the whole blogosphere for some reason was like attacking one another. So if Chris Brogan had something to say that people didn't agree with, they would go and attack Chris Brogan. And if Danny Brown wrote something that people didn't agree with, they would all go and get out their pitchforks and attack Danny Brown. And I call it the social media mob, and it certainly has calmed down since then. But back then, I mean, it was big. And I remember saying to myself, if I'm going to write this blog post, is it in any way attacking a person? And if it is, do I need to write the blog post? Or is it attacking an idea that you don't agree with? And do you have concrete takeaways that give the other side in an intelligent and professional way? Mm-hmm. Because you tend to get caught up in some of that, and you're like, yeah, that guy's an idiot, blah blah blah, and then you realize, wait a second, you're contributing to that. So I think it was a lot more rampant back then than it is now. But you're right. I mean, people say things to one another when they're behind their computer screen that they never would say in person.
We see it, I think, the most damaging in terms of life is with children or with teens, and that's the whole the the cyberbullying and all of that. What was I going to say? Oh, because you just said you said it a different way. What I say is always that to organizations is, yes, you have to understand how to communicate with your audiences. You have to understand what their expectations of your organization is and how to meet those expectations if you're going to survive the crisis. But at the same time, you also can't let social media be a bully.
Right.
And that can actually launch you into another crisis. So, for example, I can have two examples off the top of my head. Oreo, and I know you mentioned this in the book too. Oreo put out that during Gay Pride Week a couple years ago, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, they put out an Oreo cookie with the gay flag as the center.
Yep.
That's the cream. And what their statement was, they just put that on Facebook. There was no statement there. When I look at this, I see an organization that made a decision they knew it was going to be controversial. Oreo is not stupid. They knew what it was going to cause and inspire on their Facebook page and beyond. And yet they still decided to make this decision and to put out this bold statement in support of gay pride for whatever reason they felt that they needed to do that. And that was the statement. Of course, as a result, this was a huge controversy. Blogs wrote about it, news sites. Their Facebook page was overtaken with, we support you, we're going to boycott you. They knew that was going to happen, and they still made that decision to do it. Had they let social media dictate them and let the people dictate them, and had they at the last moment got scared of segregating their audience and come back and said, we're sorry, we shouldn't have done that, that would have caused a crisis.
It would have,
It absolutely would have caused a crisis. Yep. And that's what we see with Susan G. Komen.
Yeah.
That's exactly that's exactly where
the flip-flopping.
The flip-flop. And when you ask people who used to be avid supporters of this organization why they completely abandoned them, their answer is because they couldn't make up their mind and hold strong on a decision.
Yep.
They didn't follow their corporate culture. They followed whatever reasons they were following, and they weren't strong enough to hold, because it wasn't a decision, for example, like Oreo, where they said, we're going to make this decision, we know what the consequences are, but we really believe in this for whatever reason, we're going to state that. Susan G. Komen made their decision for whatever they did, and it wasn't the right decision for their corporate culture that they could hold strong to it. So they wishy-washed back and forth, and they continue to suffer this day, which is the definition of a crisis. It's that long-term repercussions on the organization's brand, reputation, and or bottom line, and they're suffering from both.
You're absolutely right. It's the we're doing this for a strategic reason, and we know that there's going to be some controversy. They had to have known that doing this with Planned Parenthood was going to create controversy. What they didn't do is stay on message and stay on strategy. We're making this decision. It's not up to you. I know you're not going to be happy about it, but we're sticking with it. And then they went back and funded Planned Parenthood again. So it was this constant flip-flopping. And every time What was the CEO's name? Nancy Brinker? Is that her name?
Yes, I think
every
so.
time she was interviewed, she gave a different answer, and it's absolutely true. You cannot support an organization that can't figure out what they're about.
The same thing with maybe a year ago with DKNY. I don't know if you remember when Humans of New York, which is a photographer, came out, and so he found out that his photographs were used in Bangkok, and he had denied them because they weren't offering him enough money, so he had denied them. So when he found out, this is, again, a potential lawsuit. DKNY could have been dragged through the mud because they stole his photographs. And they put them up the other side of the world, and he found out. They came back with, well, the trigger here that it wasn't going to be a crisis is the fact that Humans of New York flat out said, he didn't say, I'm getting on the phone with my attorney. He said, I'm not going to do anything, or I don't ask for anything. All I ask is that you donate $100,000 to the YMCA in Brooklyn, I believe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they came back right away. I wrote a blog post on how DKNY saved an issue from developing into a crisis. However, they did a brilliant job at their communication, in my opinion. However, they decided, for whatever reason, again, this is an internal reason, they didn't want to donate the $100,000. For whatever reason, they decided to donate $25,000. A week later, they were still being dragged through the mud on Facebook because people were so upset that they didn't donate that that $100,000. And had they, so when I do a lot of issues management and obviously crisis management trainings, and when I ask this question to attendees or to people I'm working with or I'm teaching, I'll say, what should they have done? This is a week later. They're being dragged through the mud. People are not giving up. Blog posts continue to write about it. This is being indexed in Google. This is, is it a crisis? Is it still an issue? They made their decision. A lot of people say, well, they had the money. They should have just donated the whole 100K. But had they done that, had they gone back a week later and said, okay, fine, we're going to donate the full 100K, in my opinion, it would have still been a lose-lose, because then everybody would have come back and said, well, you're only doing it because we made you. It's not from your heart.
Yeah, right. So it's kind of a no-win as well.
It's a no-win. And however, they looked at it and said, is this a real crisis? Is this going to impact DKNY over the long term, either our reputation or our bottom line? The answer is probably no, which it didn't. So we're going to say nothing. We gave our statement. We're going to hold firm to that statement because we believe in what we said, and we're going to let the situation die out, as it did. Yeah. So you can't let social media be the bully if you've taken the right course of action to respond to whatever the situation is. It's so fascinating.
Gap's another great example of that too. They crowdsourced and having a new logo produced, and then they launched the new logo and all that kind of stuff, and the social media mob comes out and is like, this is horrible, I can't stand the logo, blah, 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 blah. And they ended up going back and changing the logo back to the original logo. But what was interesting is as you dug into it, the people who were so up in arms about it, it was less than 1% of their customers. Most of the people who were, slamming them online about it weren't customers at all. 99% of their actual customers had no idea that they had changed their logo and changed it back. So here they've taken this whole social media mob mentality and been like, holy crap,
people don't like it.
Yeah, and didn't stand their ground. And it's, you hear about all these situations where the same thing, and I think that advice is very, very solid, that you have a strategy, you put something in play, and you stand your ground.
As long as the strategy was developed with for the culture of the organization with the right intentions, then there's nothing to fall back on.
Right.
So it's so fascinating. All of these things. The one with Gap happened a long time ago, so I remember, or a few years ago, and I remember when it happened. And one of the things is that when you're the first, so this was one of the first of its kind. They were trying to be very out there and innovative to get it crowdsourced in the first place, and then they didn't know how to react. So it was kind of before we have all of these examples, which is also hard.
Right. Sure. Of course.
Yeah, but it's so fascinating. In terms of marketing, we talked earlier about being scared and not wanting to go out there, not wanting to put yourself out there, not wanting to be the social CEO or social. I don't know if that still exists. Companies that don't know why they should be on social. I don't know. Maybe it does.
Exists. Oh, it
does. So they're fighting against it. But when you look at, and it's funny because all of these companies, whether they decide to be proactive on social or not, they're still putting out their marketing campaigns because they have to. Right? They have to get their message out there. And what I find so fascinating is that oftentimes they don't do a risk analysis. Hey, what's the worst that could happen with this campaign?
Yes.
And before we hit record today, we brought up the hashtag for NYPD, McDonald's stories. Hashtag McD stories is another great example of simply saying, hey, what could go wrong? What if people don't actually share positive stuff? What if they hijack the hashtag and share negative stuff? You know how easy that is to figure, like to assess, to think, but you have to actually put the time in to ask that question.
I hate NYPD. Search.
Yeah. Or the fact that before it even goes out of maybe people won't put positive stuff out there. They're going to put negative stuff. Sometimes you can change it. Hashtags are really hard. Campaign.
Well, I was going to say, do you think it's because it seems like it's such an easy tactic that it's one of those things that people are like, oh yeah, that's a good idea internally and let's just do it. And they don't really think this isn't a strategy, it's just a tactic. So we don't have to really think it through. We don't have to, figure out that
possible, but it's so vulnerable. Hashtags are so easy to go either way. And if for a good point, I spoke, the first podcast that I released to the world was with Mountain View Police Department, who are doing brilliant things for communicating, building that trust in the relationship and using social media in their crisis communications and that. And they recently had a crisis where there was a cougar in their city and it was on the loose and, it could have gone very, very bad. It happened to be a happy story where the cougar was released into the wild again. He wasn't hurt and nobody else was hurt. But the lady Shino Tanaka, who is responsible for Mountain View PD's social media efforts and communications, she was at home. Of course, it happened in the evening. Of course. And she knew that she needed to develop a hashtag for this. She needed to communicate with people. People knew to find, and I want to say NYPD, Mountain View PD on Twitter. She knew that there needed to be a hashtag about it. And she actually, even in her assessment, the quickest thing is to do MVs for Mountain View, MV Cougar. But she chose MV Puma, one, because it's shorter, but two, because Cougar, the woman who...
Yes, I was going to make that joke.
Yeah, and she knew that maybe it could go the wrong way. Right. So even in her crisis communications, and you have to think about that, and hashtags are so easy to be hijacked.
Yes. So
easy. But at the same time, you can look at... I got a call from a colleague of mine who had a client who was a city. I'm not going to name the city, but who was a city. And they decided as part of their big marketing strategy to put brand awareness out there for the city, to, increase tourism. Part of that huge strategy was a hashtag strategy. Mm-hmm. And my colleague called me to sit there with them once it was already launched, and it was being hijacked, but not to the extent that NYPD did or McD Stories did. But still, there was negativity. So my first thought is, of course there's negativity. You're asking the people to share something about your city. Not everybody is going to have these great stories to share. However, your marketing campaign, the objective of it is to build brand awareness, to connect with your citizens, and to bring in tourism. There's not so much negativity that is drowning out the positivity. So why not take that negativity and look at it as an opportunity, respond to them and say, you know what, we should bring this up in the next town meeting. I'm happy that you brought this to my attention. And so there are opportunities with hashtags and similar strategies, but you absolutely need to assess the risks before and then understand or identify whether or not the risks outweigh the benefits. And in this particular case of the city, in my opinion, it was, hey, leverage that and turn that into an opportunity to bring you even further along in the end goal for your marketing strategy.
Yeah, and think about from a political perspective, if you're actually listening to that negativity and doing something about it, holy cow.
Wonders.
Tons of great goodwill.
Absolutely. Tons. Absolutely. It's I could talk about this forever. I want to end with your last chapter, which I really loved. It's about, upcoming trends and stuff. And there are two things you say a lot, but there's two things that I really took away and that I completely support for both your angle in reputation management and marketing and mine in crisis management and prevention. The first one is you said that now and continuing in the future, the customer needs to be number one.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think every story that we just talked about in the last 3/4 of an hour really just show, case in point there. And the one that I really loved is your culture must be about experimentation, and you must be willing to take some risk. I love it.
Well, you'd be surprised how many are not willing to take some risk. And that's actually, we have a checklist of things that we look for in clients. And we will not take a client if they're not willing to take risk. And in the beginning, of course, we would, talk about the kinds of risks that they would have to take and how they'd have to be comfortable with, asking for forgiveness instead of permission, and those trust us to do our job and those kinds of things. And what's funny is that most people will say, yeah, I totally want to do that. That's why we're talking to you. And then when you get into it, you discover that no, they really don't want to do it.
Well, they didn't realize what you meant.
Right. Oh, yeah. Or they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then you get into it and they're like, holy crap, the emotional side of that is this is really scary and I could lose my job over this, and it becomes very,
risky.
Yeah, risky and anxious. So we know the right questions to ask to dig even further into that to discover whether or not they really are willing to take some risk. And I'd say 90% are not. They're not.
And it's something that I say, of course, if you're going to take risk, you have to assess the risk and plan for, so
right.
Take risk responsibly. But you do. And even in your crisis communications, you have to be able to, and some people look at apologizing as a risk. I know attorneys do, most of them.
Oh, for sure.
You have to be able to take that risk, because if you don't apologize, I'm sorry, you can win in court, but your business might go under.
Right.
So,
right.
But, and even, the experimentation, that's what it's all about now. Building the trust and then experiment with, not with that trust, but with your audiences and find out, create new ways to get your message out and to continue to build that trust and be the first to do it. So take that risk.
And I think that's a very salient point, is be the first to do it. And today, there still are industries that they're not doing anything. And when you're the first to do it, you can maintain that leadership position for a very, very long time. Because this stuff moves so quickly that when you're the first, you're already ahead of the trends. And you're already looking for new opportunities while your competitors are going, oh, crap, they just did this, now I've got to figure it out.
Yep. And now, how can we do it? And they don't. And I think that you even said that in your book. I'm thinking of an example, and I think I got it from your book with the McDonald's special sauce.
Yep.
Where they gave the recipe out to the public.
They gave the recipe out. Yeah.
All their competitions decided to make, and it didn't taste the same.
As it turns out, it's not the Big Mac at Wendy's.
Go figure. Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I've had so much fun.
I've had so much fun, and I think you're doing a webinar for Spin Sucks, which I'm really excited about because you're awesome.
I'm so excited about it too, and I think that by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have pretty well just done the webinar.
Oh, well.
So we're talking in the past, but no, I'm so excited for that. So I'm looking forward. That's at the beginning of August.
Oh, good. Excellent.
August.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward.
And more sharing of some really great content and really great stuff to help organizations get where they need to be. Thank you. This was great. Thanks to you. Yes, so tell everybody where they can find and follow you.
Probably the easiest is spinsucks.com. It's easy to spell, easy to remember. Everything's there, all our social networks, the book, blah, blah, blah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. It's been
You're welcome.
So much fun. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. We really do appreciate all of your support. So if you could share this podcast with your followers, friends, colleagues, or anybody that you think would benefit from listening to this discussion, then we'd really appreciate you doing so. You can also feel free to head on over to iTunes and or Stitcher and write us a review and leave us your feedback. If you have any questions or suggestions for topics on crisis communication that you'd like to hear about, then we definitely want to hear from you. You can email us at crisis@agnesday.com, or you can go and tweet me on Twitter or get in touch with me in any way. I'm all over the web. If you have any questions for Gini Dietrich from this week's podcast, then feel free to send them over to me. I'll make sure they get to Gini, and I will post her responses as a blog post over on the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com. Thank you so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.